Folks, thanks so much for tuning in today. I'm telling you, it's just going to be a blockbuster day here. Usually I give you a quick look ahead of what we're going to talk about. I'm just going to say today you're going to be shocked. You're going to laugh at some. You're going to cry at others. There's just so much stuff. And I just want to say again that, again, yesterday and the day before, we had reports that some of the stories we did we were the first ones. We were ahead of mainstream media in getting these stories. Mainstream media, some of them pick them up from us. So thanks for those of you who are calling things in for people I used to work for in various ministries. We appreciate all that. We're going to keep on going here right into this. Hang on, folks. I want to headline, start off with an interesting thing in New York City. Of course, you know, one of my favorite, that's a laughable, politicians, Mr. Mamdani, who is the socialist / communist Islamist mayor of New York City. Well, of course, he did very well when he got elected, won a huge part of the vote, and it was all left-leaning and liberal, of course, and a lot of younger people. And very interesting thing that has just happened, because in Electoral District 45 in New York City, that's primarily the East Village of New York City, not exactly a right-wing enclave. And I lived in the East Village for a while, did some work in there a few years ago in New York City. It's a great place. Loved the neighborhood. Well, they have risen up against the mayor that they voted for, and they said, no way you're going to bring a homeless shelter into our nice, tiny, tony little district. And they're suing him for even thinking about bringing in a homeless shelter for about 250 people. So very interesting that you can see the left. They maybe like to talk about these wonderful causes of caring for the poor, but when they're landing in their backyard, not so much. You know, I just want to say that I've said for years, even when I was minister of in charge of prisons in Canada and correction systems, if you are having recovery places for people to try and break the horrific effects of long-term addiction, you can't do them in the cities. I don't care if it's the electoral district 45 of New York City or if it's downtown East Side in Vancouver. Governments have to look. It's going to cost a little more, but you've got to get these facilities out in the country where drugs and all other kinds of things are not immediately available. Little tip there for politicians grappling with this. Well, Israel, Lebanon, let's get to that. A 3-week ceasefire has been announced, and they're also doing the anniversary today of something that's important. I want to talk about that in a minute, but just reminding you that right now in the Middle East and Middle Eastern waters, navigating the waters, there are 3 U.S. aircraft carriers, 200 aircraft, 15,000 military, including sailors. And Trump has announced any more of these little strike boats that are zapping around, they're going to get blown out of the water, just like he did with the drug boats north of Venezuela. So watch for what's going to continue to roll out there. Benjamin Netanyahu has just made an announcement that he has been battling prostate cancer. He's had surgery. They say he's clear. He said he didn't want to announce it while he was in the middle of the most intense part of the war because it could have an effect. So keeping that in mind there. And it's also, they're recognizing and memorializing today. It's the day 43 years ago when in Beirut, the U.S. embassy was attacked by Hezbollah, by Iranian financed terrorists. 63 people killed in Beirut that day. In Lebanon, many of them, over half of them, or a good portion of them, were U.S. citizens, and then, of course, citizens of Lebanon. And that is just one of many of the wide-scale terrorism slaughters that have taken place over the last 40 years, financed by Iran, and again, showing why Israel is focused on Lebanon. They're not attacking Lebanon, they're attacking the Hezbollah strongholds in Lebanon. The U.S. has just seized 2 ships. So you've probably seen that on the news. They're keeping the blockade. And it's interesting, the Iranians, who are very smart, very savvy, they know how to play our mainstream media, as they say, as clowns, and by feeding them information. And they're saying that Iran is saying they can just wait out Trump because he's got these midterms coming, so he's going to bail out of the Middle East rather than lose the midterms. And Trump is saying, no, he's in this for the long haul. And what we're watching now is how long can the Iranian regime stay in place while increasingly their government is deprived of money, is deprived of resources. When will the people be able to rise up? That's being looked at. Let's jump to California. In California, The Democrats in California are saying that the police are involved in racist activity. The racist activity they're talking about is when trucks are pulled over, truckers on the highway, and of course, people are always concerned with this increase in semi-truck and trucker crashes. What they are doing, police are doing, and it is within the mandate to do this, is they are asking the drivers of those trucks if they can read the English road signs, the highway signs, the warning signs. And in many of these cases, they can't. And so their licenses are being revoked until they can prove they can read. And in California, the Democrats are saying this is racist. It's racist to take people off the road who can't even read the safety signs. So we'll see how that works for them in their upcoming elections. Well, also in California, there's an individual by the name of Israel Sija, and he was put in jail many years ago for the first-degree manslaughter of, at that time, his girlfriend. He's gone through the sex changes and identifies now as a female, even though he's male. But anyway, he had a multi-year sentence, and it's very interesting that he's being let out early, or the thought is going to be let out early. In California, they've put in place something called the Elders Release Program. So it used to be if you were a serious sex offender, you still couldn't be released if you were under 65. You couldn't be out on parole. They reduced that in California to age 50. You could be released. And in this particular case, it appears that Governor Newsom is getting so much heat that this particular individual is going to be released, that he may think of changing the law back. So it's amazing. Democracy is a wonderful thing, folks, especially at election time. That is the time to be hitting up your candidates with the tough questions. And Newsom still, though he can't run for governor again, still, of course, lining himself up to run for president. Well, in California, also, they passed another law, and it's law AB 2624, AB 2624, and it's directed, it's purported that it's being directed at one individual, a young guy, you may have heard of him, by the name of Nick Shirley. This guy is sort of an amateur reporter journalist, and he went around Minnesota a while ago exposing huge multi-million-dollar frauds of places that were getting huge money. Sometimes it was daycare, sometimes it was psychiatric centers, and other places claimed to be getting millions and millions of dollars from the taxpayers, and in fact, they didn't even exist, these places. He's done the same in California, and he's exposing all kinds of situations where these NGOs, these so-called nonprofit groups, looks like many of the leaders of the nonprofit groups have been actually profiting very, very well, because they don't, in fact, even deliver the services that they say. He's been exposing that, and they're so upset, the Democrat politicians, that they're bringing in special legislation to stop them from doing that. They're saying reporters should not be allowed to show, employees and employees' faces and et cetera. And, I agree with that to a degree. You can't put employees at risk, but sometimes it's inevitable when you're doing this research. So bringing in a special law to try and shut them down. Let's see if it goes through or not. In Florida, gentleman, and I use the word carefully, by the name of Phoenix Ickner. This is the guy who, if you remember, last year did shooting and killing at a university in Florida. He wound up wounding a lot of people, killing too. And it's recently come to light that he was getting instruction on the best weapons to use from ChatGPT. They've got now the transcripts telling him which weapons were the most lethal, etc. Now, ChatGPT is looking at these and showing people and saying, yeah, they are giving information on which firearms are the most lethal, but Chat says they continue to, in the conversation with this maniac, Chat continued to say, what are you using this for? What do you want this information for? And of course, that's what's being disputed in court right now. Did Chat actually help and advise in this awful killing? Well, in Oregon, there's a person who is a biological male, transgender, and he's just won $295,000 in a lawsuit because he said his name is Zara Lola Zombie. Quite rightly, if you look at his/her picture, Zara Lola Zombie. So in jail, in men's prison, because when he was well, is still calling himself a man. He brutally beat to death his girlfriend. So he was in prison for that. While he was in prison, of course, he then decided he's not a male anymore, got the transgender surgery, etc., and was transferred just in April 2025 to a female prison. But that's not the issue. The issue was, he says that he got sexually abused while he was in prison as a male, and then while he was transitioning, he said he was raped and assaulted by other men in the prison, and he sued, and he got $295,000. Let me say, this is a serious situation. When I was minister in charge of jails and correctional facilities in Canada, it did bother me that men could be exposed to other men in terms of being raped, in terms of being sexually abused. I have advised governments to stop their program of putting two people in the same cell. You're going to have to go to the extra expense, is my advice, and have single cells so you can avoid some of this. And you need more cameras. It has to be explored. Sometimes the guards themselves will allow some of these brutes to rape other men because the guards don't like the men. There is a lot going on in prisons that should not go on. And if it is, in fact, proved that these rapes and these sexual assaults against this transgendered guy, woman, if that was true, then he does, I believe, deserve some protection and maybe even some compensation. So there's a dual role there, but it also shows just the lunacy of these transgender surgeries being done on guys in prison, and then vicious cases where these guys have killed women before, then they get transferred into women's prisons. It should be the politicians who are on trial for that kind of insanity, and you need to ask your local politicians and provincial or state and national ones why this continues. Those things need to be taken to court. There's a Republican, you may have seen him, sorry, I don't know that he's Republican, a representative in the House in Congress in the U.S. His name is Tim Burchett. He was recently on Piers Morgan, and he is sort of fanning the flames of the whole UFO conspiracies. I'm not firmly convinced there are UFOs flying around out there. There are things that from time to time fly around that don't get identified right away. But he is saying that many pilots have told him about a giant object larger than the size of a football field going at high speeds above their plane. I don't know if it's true or not, but there's going to be a lot of speculation as it continues. I do think that if it's a conspiracy, you have so many thousands of people who'd be aware of it and nobody's talking about it or coming forward with the proof. Anyway, he's getting some attention. Dr. Jeffrey Sloka from Kitchener, Ontario, and he is a neuroscientist, a surgical doctor, and he operates in the Grand River Hospital facility in Kitchener, Ontario. He was charged, you may have seen this, when the sexual charges against him started, he had 76 different charges against him by a large variety of women. That was before it went to court. From 76, it was dropped to 48 charges. Now, I could be wrong on this, but the initial that we've got, you might even want to check the news today, is that he is going to be absolved of all 48 of those charges. I'm not pretending to know all the details. I'm just saying that's going to be a case of real interest. The federal government has approved, finally, after waiting way too long, the $4 billion Sunrise project by Enbridge. This is a pipeline, but people are going to say it's more pipelines. It's actually adding kilometers, 139,000 kilometers to an existing pipeline to get natural gas, more natural gas, and First Nations groups are included in benefiting from this. But finally, as I've been advocating, a number of people advocating for years, that Canada's highly refined oil and gas products can benefit the entire world and actually result in lower emissions, as countries like China, who still hugely use coal, and India, which burns dung, could use Canada's product. And unfortunately, politicians in Canada have always been so nervous about the Greenpeace activist, unscientific fanatics that they have slowed these projects down. So good news there. We're going to be able to help some of these countries in terms of getting off their high carbon emission fuels. Well, along those lines, the COP 2030 is a UN generated initiative to look at severely restricting carbon emissions by the year 2030. A number of countries, so many countries have bailed out of that now because they're using their own science and realizing that highly refined oil and gas products maybe aren't hurting the environment as much as people try and say. They bailed out of COP30 or put it on hold at least. And so another group has started up in St. Marta, Colombia. There's an organization of about 50 countries, and they're saying, okay, if the UN bailed, we're going to force the issue. We're going to drive these, quite frankly, I think, unscientific claims that we have to shut down all oil and gas. Canada is sending representatives there, not ministers, but sending representatives. And I'm hoping and encouraging those representatives that go there are going to talk about the benefits of highly refined gas and oil products and how that is reducing emissions around the world. We'll see if that is going to work, or we'll see if it's just an attempt by the federal Liberals to get into the back door of Canada some of these restrictions, which just don't make any sense at all. Well, there's a case, a really disturbing case here now. These two individuals, and sometimes I'm going to get, there's so much gender confusion on this, talk about gender confusion, I may get it slightly off, but it starts out, you got a bio female mom. She's got a partner who's also female. They have a divorce. They split up. The bio mom, the female, she keeps custody, but custody is also granted to the two new parents of the supposedly adoptive 10-year-old kid. They both identify as women, and they wanted the 10-year-old boy to get gender surgery, and the bio mom went to court, the original mom, and said, no, that's not going to happen. So what they did, they planned a camping trip to Canada. That's how they got approval, and they were going to be staying, okay, you'll see this in the news, at the Days Inn in Alberta. Hey, that's not me, okay? I'm not related to the Days Inn, nothing, I don't have any problem with that hotel chain. But that was their plan. They registered there. They got approval to go. And as soon as they crossed the border, they got to Vancouver. They flew to Mexico City. And then they flew into Cuba, flew into Havana, where doctors there agreed they would take this 10-year-old, and subject him to life-altering, permanent, gender, so-called related surgery. Thankfully, the bio mom took the whole thing to court. The court stopped the process in Cuba. The U.S. actually sent a plane to rescue the 10-year-old and have brought him back. The two apparently women who had taken him there for whatever reason, they wanted him to have the gender affirming, they call it surgery, I call it gender altering surgery. They've been brought back. They're going to be facing charges. So a bizarre case there. And that brings us to, and they, by the way, they had a note from their health therapist who was giving all of the instruction in terms of how to do this gender altering care. Well, also on the Canada-U.S. front, the issue of U.S. liquor being kept off the shelves, not just in Canada, but in BC, is really boiling up, because a lot of people in British Columbia are saying, look, we don't particularly like Trump. We don't like the trade tariffs, but the occasional time we like to have an American beer, and we want the U.S. to have our wine products. So stop with the boycott. This is what they're saying to the provincial government in British Columbia. Let the liquor flow to those who want it, and we'll find out just how strong Canadians do oppose these tariffs. They'll just voluntarily not buy the American product. And then they had the minister on, the BC minister, absolutely denigrating anybody who was saying they, might want to have an American beer now and then, told them they should just go home and quit their crying. So it's rising up a bit in British Columbia. We'll see if it continues. Well, you'll remember the member of parliament just recently, Marilyn Gladu from Sarnia, and she crossed the floor to join the Liberals, and everybody was looking very carefully. Was she bribed to do that? Was she offered some things? Because, of course, that is illegal. And she has just come out saying that she did notice while she was sitting on the Conservative benches that constituencies that had Liberal MPs seemed to get more money and seemed to get more infrastructure projects approved. And she sent a list as soon as she had sent a list to Gregor Robertson for approval. Hadn't heard anything back, but after she crossed the floor, she's indicated she heard from the infrastructure Liberal minister. Seems like she might get some projects moving. That's being looked into very carefully. So Marilyn Gladue, the floor crossing MP, continues to be bringing some heartburn to the Liberal Party. Wealth shifting to sports. I just want to say on the Canadian side, NFL in their first draft round, Akeem Mesidor, you may not have heard of him, but a fantastic defensive back, and the first time in Canada's history that we've seen a defensive back being plucked up by the NFL on the first draft. So good work. He's going to California. Good work to Akeem Mesidor on his being chosen there. Interestingly, the story's been out that the NFL draft, if you're not familiar with it, is hugely watched. It's a major TV event, and all kinds of speculation goes in because there could be about up to 50 people or more on the first round of the draft. And so the draft pickers, these professional individuals who just are glued to the sports world and are really pretty good at saying who they think might be drafted, that's become a huge betting thing, of course. You can bet on anything. And a couple of the best ones in the world say they're still smarter than AI. And so they got AI models to submit who they thought would be among the first 50 in the first round of the NFL draft. And AI doing pretty well. As well as, and this has happened also in some other drafts, AI tends to do as well as, in some cases better. Where AI can't compete, of course, is in the very last minute when these top sports guys they do get secret information from various clubs, or there might be something breaking about the individual, the athlete's health that's brand new, and so they still get the edge. But if you want to be seen among your buddies and your boyfriends or girlfriends, whoever likes the draft, as being pretty good, go to the AI model. The Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, you'll remember when President Trump said he was offering gold-plated visas to anybody. Well, it was directed at Canada, but anybody in the world who comes up with $1 million of investment into the U.S., you can get fast-tracked. Howard Lutnick had said there was 1,000 of these sold already, and under testimony just yesterday, he said, okay, actually only one has been approved, but he said there's hundreds in the lineup, so it's just the bureaucracy that's slowing it down. But we'll see if there's a big pickup in those or not. And talking about the White House, whatever you're doing Saturday night, if you want to watch an amazing show, President Trump has said, remember, he famously declared he was not going to that White House Correspondents' Dinner anymore. He was fed up with it. He gets dumped on and trashed and everything else, so he had quit. He's announced he's going. He's going this Saturday night, so he gets to make a presentation and shoot at everybody. But they, believe me, the journalists are going to be lined up for him. I think that's going to have very high ratings. You want to watch that Saturday night. And by the way, it's not a comedian who's usually been a comedian who has headlined it in the past. But this time it's Oz Perlman. I don't know if you've heard of him, but quite well-known comedian mentalist. He's one of these guys who says he can predict what you're thinking. So take a look at that Saturday night. It's going to be wild. Among the Gen Zs or Gen Zs in the UK, first of all, there's been some sort of disturbing reports in the US that an increasing, in fact, a majority of Gen Z or Gen Z don't think they would support their own country, would want to go to war, and say they're not even that supportive of the United States as an entity, as a country. That's the first time that we've seen a tilt in that age group. It also is showing up in the UK. Used to be people would love to wear some kind of form of the UK flag, the Union Jack as they called it, with the St. George's Cross being central to that. And now a minority, only 41% of Gen Zs in the UK say they now would wear that cross. So you're running into a problem as a country when you have large percentage of the population, especially the young population, who are fed, and it's usually China-fed TikTok and very strong leftist TikTok and other messages. That's all they watch, so they get a negative view of their countries. Well, here, I'm putting my neck out a little bit on this one. I have information, and now it might be old, the stuff moves so fast, but that Emma Chamberlain's famous podcast, Anything Goes, is going to be coming to an end. She started it in 2019. She was up to 446 episodes, does a lot of her broadcasting actually from bed or sitting around in chairs or from interesting places. So keep an eye on that. See if Emma is taking her show off the air or not. If you want to know what was being listened to in terms of retro music, you remember the Cranberries, and back in '93, their hit Linger. That's big now on the retro side, coming back strong. And talk about things that live on. If you remember in last September, Putin, the head of Russia and the head of China, Xi Jinping, were caught on a hot mic as they were walking along, and they were talking about immortality and is it possible to live longer or even live forever. That got a lot of airtime at the time. Well, now, just in the last couple of days, news reports about OpenAI and Sam Altman, who owns that. He's invested $180 million into his own scientific research plant and looking at retro bioscience. That is the ability to be able to live forever biologically. Peter Thiel, of course, as we know, a multi-billionaire, his biotech company in Silicon Valley, big time into investing into how we can live forever. Leave those thoughts with you. And I recall hearing Billy Graham once talking about he had a way in which people could live forever. You might want to check that out. See you tomorrow, Saturday, for the week ahead. Bye now.